All right, guys, let's talk about engine tuning. We're going to kind of go over some of the stuff. This is a really complex subject, but what I'm going to kind of go over are some of the things that variations that can change and make your engine run better or run within the parameters, run cooler. There's just a ton of different things that engine tuning can do. And the whole thing is to go back to the basics of engine stuff and realize the basic, I'm trying to think of how you explain it, things like compression, timing, valve timing, ignition timing, valve lift on your cam, and valve lift to compression ratio. There's like a ratios in there. All those things can affect, what size jets you use in your carburetor, what timing you should have your engine at, and there's no like specific rule of thumb to tell you what exactly you need to do, but you need to understand how these things work. So that's kind of what I'm going to explain about that in this video. So original VW engines, in my opinion, were kind of lean. They had really small camshaft and, larger ports on the exhaust when they had the dual port engine. And it was like kind of in my opinion, kind of a lean situation, but it was probably more for emission standards and things like that at that point, because they were starting that in the later years. There's always those guys that say you just can't beat the original. If you have it all original, it's done right, it's engineered, the best it can be. But that may or may not be true because of emission standards, because of pricing, costs, things like that. They were trying to meet. It's a production company trying to meet a price point that's affordable, and they're trying to do is as little as possible to keep the price down. If you realize Volkswagens were a really, really cheap car, and that's what they were trying to do all the time. Price point was a huge portion of their engineering. And so a lot of people say, well, you can't beat the Volkswagen engineers, and that is absolutely, we beat them many times. There's a ton of guys who have beat them. So that can be a farce. I mean, there's some good ideas they had that you probably shouldn't change, but there's also some things that, definitely you can improve. I mean, look at the latch system on this stupid thing here. It was obviously a cost thing. They made the cheapest thing they could make. I'm just giving that as an example. They also did the similar types of things in their engines, and we'll kind of go over some of that. One of the things that I get told a lot of times is if you run a performance cam, you're going to have an engine that runs hotter than stock, and I've 100% proved that to be a farce. Again, okay, let's just kind of go over this here, because this is why I found this to be a farce. So the larger the cam, the more air and fuel go into the combustion chamber. And if you have a larger cam than stock and you have more air and fuel in there, is that going to make it run rich or lean? So there's air-fuel mixture, and then there's also air-fuel volume. So more air-fuel volume in your combustion chamber can make your engine run cooler, because it is more air and fuel than the engine can burn, which makes it inefficient, which also makes it put out more emissions, but it also can make it run cooler. So the cams that came in these things stock are just tiny little things. They were like, I think it's like 226 lift, 226 duration. That's a guess. I don't really know, but that's what I believe. And there was a few different cam options. Just going to a larger cam this one example here. I have no idea what it is. Giant thing, I think. Yeah, huge. V725, I think that's a big one. So just going to a larger cam can put more air and fuel into the combustion chamber, which can make it run cooler. Now, this is where tuning comes in. Then you decide, okay, since I've got more air and fuel in the combustion chamber, now I want to get more compression to combust that air and fuel. So if you add compression to it, that's typically what you're going to do. So if you put a larger cam in than stock, then a lot of times you're going to go to a higher compression ratio. But then there's limits on that. So if you start getting up to the 9, 10 to 1 compression ratio, then you're kind of running into that as far as you can go type of thing. I'd say for street, really try and stay away from 9. 8 1/4, 8.5 is totally doable on the street if you're running a performance cam. Now, if you do that with a stock cam, it's going to be even leaner. Okay, just for an example, you have less air and fuel going into the combustion chamber, and that makes it less there for it to combust. So there's less in there, so it can run leaner. It's kind of a by volume, not by air fuel mixture. So there's all these different things that come into play, and you have to kind of figure these things out. So just keep that in mind. So another thing that I've done before, let's say I put in too large of a cam, is I've done things like advance the timing more and go up to like 36, 37 degrees total advance. And you might say, well, Mike, what does that do? Well, what that does is more advance gives the air and fuel more time to burn. So now let's say it's, instead of being, it will go by total advance, instead of being 30 degrees before top dead center, okay, it's 36 degrees before top dead center at cruise speed, and it gives the engine a more time to burn that fuel. Now, the problem with some of those things is that you could create detonation. You can create detonation from being too lean, by having not enough air and fuel mixture, or having your carburetor being too lean. Okay, or you can create detonation by having too much advance on your distributor, or again, too much compression. So the more compression you have, the less chance of you running more advance, because the compression is what fires the fuel. The advance, more advance, also does the same thing. Through a longer period of time of advance, it gives it more chance to burn. So that can happen. Also, more different fuels too. So if you run like premium fuel, can burn faster, okay, and allows and doesn't allow to create as much heat. So it's a good idea, again, to run premium fuel in your Volkswagen. And then also your air fuel mixture on top of that. So you've got all these things that kind of work together. And again, I can't give you any advice all the time, but you have to think about all of these things when you're doing tuning. So I'm having some challenges on the bucket truck, because some other things that can happen is flow from the exhaust. So if you don't have enough flow going through it, that's going to restrict things and change the speed in which the air goes through the carburetor, and that can change your fuel mixture there. There's just a ton of different things. You just have to think about them all when you're trying to tune. So just kind of a rule of thumb, the bigger the cam, typically the more compression you need to fire that. The higher the compression ratio, the more air and fuel you're going to need in there. So big valves, again, those do the same thing. If you've got a really big cam, you got really big valves, you're probably going to need a lot of compression. So keep that in mind. And then you're going to run hot because you got too much compression. That's why cam limitations are really important, not going too big. Like I said, stock is just, I don't like the stock cams. I think that they just are way underperformed. I think you can go, if you're just going to go all stock, you can go to like one of those cheater cams. There's a few different ones. The Engel 90, I think the CB Performance makes a cheater cam. I forget what they call it. I don't even know if they make the Engel 90 anymore. They used to make it a long time ago. A lot of people just go straight to the 100. Yeah, then you got to add compression a little bit to make it work better. But just one of those cheater cams really makes a big difference in your performance. Can make the engine run a little cooler, especially if you retune the carburetor to match with it. You have to do that. A lot of people think you just put the cam in and that's it. No, you got to re-engineer everything. You got to go through your exhaust flow. You know, you got to go through your intake system. You have to go through and pull your main jet out. You have to change your intermediate jets and all that stuff to get them to work right. And try adding more fuel to it. Maybe change the timing as well. You might be able to get more advance out of it just by just changing the camshaft and using the same compression ratio. If you did, you could probably get a couple more degrees advance, which would probably solve the problem if you couldn't get compression in there. There's just variations. So if you can't get more compression, you can go with more advance. That kind of helps, okay? If you have more compression, you may not be able to go as much advance. Those are all types of things you think about. So today we have more accurate tools. This is an oxygen sensor, and you just put this in, put a bung in your exhaust, and you can see what your oxygen, trying to think, carbon dioxide ratio is. So today we have a lot of different tools you can use to find out where to put your air fuel mixture. You know, you can't do a air fuel volume test really with this, but you can do your final air fuel mixture at cruise speed and kind of know what it is by using one of these and getting it to the amount. I'm not going to give you the amounts that I use because if you're leaning it out, I don't want any part of that. But you can look these things up on the Samba, find out, you know, what it is for Volkswagen. It's different. I will tell you this, it's different than on a Chevy or anything else. Definitely you're going to be a little richer on a Volkswagen than you are in those. So that's a tool to use to final tune. Maybe later I'll come up with a better way to explain all this stuff, I'm hoping, but I might confuse you a little bit right now. But I just want you to kind of have your mind open that all of these things affect your tuning, the size of the cam you use, the carburation that you have, the valve size. I'll kind of give you some ideas on that real quick here. So let's talk about what's an 1800 or a 1904. To me, the 69 millimeter crank is dead to me. People go, what? It's dead? Now, if I had a 69, okay, and it was in good shape, original crankshaft, never been machined, and I just wanted to, and I already had the crank or whatever, I would use it. But if I'm going to go out and buy a brand new crankshaft, I'm not going to buy a 69. It's like, what is the point? Really, you can go straight to a 74. A little bit of work to the case, doesn't take much. 74 crankshafts are what was in the 912. I mean, there's a, you know, the 74 is just, you know, you get more power from it. You got counterweights. If you're going to go counterweighted in 69, it's just really pointless just to put a 69. You might as well just go to 74 short rods and be done. it really works well. In short rods, people go, well, the longer the rod, the more better performance. That's true. You can use short rods or stock rods with it. If you go short rods, it makes it fit better in the car. You don't have as many cylinder shims and all that to work with. But there's reasons to do either one. You know, you might want to have a 0 deck height and try and, you know, put the head gaskets on it to get more fire in the cylinder head, which creates less detonation. These are all things to think about. You can actually end up with a higher compression ratio and have less detonation than if you have barrel fire, which is when you have the, you know, 60 thousandths or 50 thousandths in the barrel. But you have to know what you're doing to be able to do that. To go to 0, you better have step cuts in your head to lower your compression ratio, and head gaskets as well. So all those things, you know, things you need to learn as you know, look into that. But the 74 gives you a lot of options that you couldn't get with a 69. 69, it doesn't give you the ability to be able to fire in the head more. So to me, it's just, the 69 is just the old school way. The reason we didn't use them years ago, the reason we didn't go with 69s back in the old days, or we went with 69s all the time, is because the 74, the rod, it wasn't the crankshaft. The crankshafts were $250 for a Crasa, something like that. But the rods were, you know, you didn't have a lot of rod options. You had, you know, somebody would clearance a set of stock rods and they were weak, or you had to go to like a you know, Carrillo rods, which were like another $400, and rebuilding your whole engine cost you about $300 or $400 for all the parts. So, you know, you're adding another $400 to $650, $700, $800 or whatever to your engine build just to go to a 74. So nobody was doing it back in the day, but now you've got inexpensive rods, you've got inexpensive crankshafts that work really well, that are counterweighted, and there just is no reason to build a 69 in my opinion. It's not more reliable, it's not anything, that's just a farce in my opinion. So 74 1800, that's what this is, 74 1800. So things that I considered when we put this together. Now, when you start your tuning, you should start and your engine build. You should figure out the camshaft that you're going to use that's going to work well with the heads you're going to use, that's going to work well with the compression ratio that you're using, and then tune to that. So, for instance, I got a stock exhaust on this. Everybody keeps telling me, put the bigger exhaust on it. Yes, that would work better. Believe me, I'd get more performance out of that. If I put a stock, listen, if you're going to build one of these 1800s and you're putting it in a bus, I mean, this thing is, okay, I don't want it to be not original. I want it to look original, okay? And it has that pump on it, so it has to idle smooth. These are all the things that I was thinking about when I made this. So yeah, that's why I'm running a stock exhaust on it, and tuning it is a little bit difficult because, you know, it's really restricted here, and we've got a bigger engine than stock. So that's definitely a challenge, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means that it's just going to be a little more difficult. It's been a little bit difficult to tune. So if you're going to build one of these and you're going to put it in a bus, if you can do it, the dual port heads are going to be way better, okay? If you're going to run dual port heads and a single carburetor, you can do that with a PIC 34, and a merged exhaust would be just amazing on this engine. This thing would pull not an inch and 5/8, please don't go that big. 1.5 inches is perfect. If you go too big on your exhaust, you create turbulence going through the exhaust and doesn't flow correctly. So what that does is that takes away from your torque, your bottom end, okay? The bottom end, he's gonna have to rev up higher to get flow. So going too big on the exhaust is another issue that you can run into for tuning that's going to take you out of the range of what you're trying to do. So what I was trying to do with this one, torque. We're trying to move, heavy vehicle. This thing's never going to go fast. It's scary going 60 miles an hour in this thing. Faster than that, it doesn't stop very good. I don't really want it to go any faster than 60. The gear ratios aren't going to let it do it really much. So it'll probably go 65 right now, the way it is. I could do 65 in it, but I wouldn't do that for long periods of time. But if I needed to, I could. So with this engine. So anyway, if you were going to build one of these, dual port heads and exhaust system would be a huge improvement, and it would still have plenty of torque to pull a heavy bus. It would have plenty, but I don't want it to look that way. I want it to look like this. It's going to idle and run that pump. You know, it has to have I want the original air cleaner on it. There's no space for me to put something else on there, and it just look hokey when you open up the deck lid. I don't mind it. It has a 009 distributor. That doesn't really bother me much, but I kind of like that original looking stuff there. I've got the cooler hidden. Yeah, you know, people go, well, the cooler in the engine compartment adds heat, and that's true. It's better if you put it over the transmission, but then again, look at here. You know, we've got outriggers. Getting to that area is, it's just not doable, guys. It's much easier to put it right here. So it's going to suck some of that hot air in through the intake, but because I don't have a stand-up cooler, okay, it's putting full airflow going through all the cylinders evenly, so that hot air is evenly being dispersed through the whole engine and not going to really make that much difference in engine temperature. Those are all things that I've thought about during this build. So we'll talk about camshaft choices and stuff like that now. Just some examples. You start there. You always start when you're building the engine. Camshaft size. You start and you go with compression ratio. And compression ratio is affected by the engine size. So if you go larger engine, if you go to like a 1904, 1968 with that 74, now you're running into combustion chamber issues. So you're able to get as much as about 54 cc combustion chamber out of a single port head. I think that's about as far as you can go without doing some serious fly cutting and I don't know, all kinds of crap to get it to, you know, be bigger than that. But by just step cutting it, you can go to, I think, a 54 cc combustion chamber. But what that does is that limits you your engine size, because so now you run into these issues. So let's say you go bigger than you go to the 1968. Now either you're going to have a lot of barrel fire, or you can go to the 60cc AA Performance or the 60cc CB Performance. That's why they make those heads, the CB Performance Panchitos, and you can put more fire in the head and still run a really tight deck height instead of being 70, 80, 90 thousandths. I've seen a lot of guys do that, and you're kind of going against the benefits. It's always best to have more air and fuel fire in the head. The more you can get in that head, the better. But if you run a zero deck height and you don't have either the copper shims that give you that 60 thousandths, you know, distance between there, or you can step cut the head and it gives you that distance between there. You always have to put your cylinder in the head and check it. So there's a lot of things to do there. I show that on the engine build of this. If you want to go back to that engine build, I'll show you. I slide the cylinder on there and I look inside to see if it would hit anywhere, because I was going to like a 35 thousandths deck height, which is not, you cannot do that. Well, it's not a good idea. I know people who do. It's not a good idea to go that tight on something you're riding on the street without step cutting the head and all that, or running head gaskets. So sorry guys, I got around in circles a little bit, but let's go back to the engine build thing. You figure out your cam size you want to put in it based on whatever information you want. Do I want a smooth idle? For this one I had to go kind of smooth idle because I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so I went with an angle 100 because I can get a reground 100, not because it's the best cam. There might be other ones, maybe the Scat C20. That one seems pretty good too. There's a bunch of different ones that are in that same range. Web 86. The Web 86, even though it shows less cam, you listen to my 1904 with the Web 86, man, it is a rumply idle, man. It's like all over the place. This thing's smooth, pretty smooth. But it specs out almost the same. So I don't know. Okay, I don't know. I wouldn't, you know, I don't know. There's so many unknowns in there, guys. I don't know every cam size, every one to use. I don't know. You guys can comment those things below. So you start with your cam size. I got to stand up for a minute. And then you figure out, okay, do I want this thing to run a little on the rich side? So then you might run a little bit less. So that cam, let's say the cam likes, like the Engel 100, likes a 8 1/4 to 1 compression ratio roughly, okay, for it to have the air fuel volume it needs to burn pretty much correctly. Based on it all varies with engine size, but for the 1800 that's probably about right. Maybe for a bigger engine might like less compression ratio than that. If you follow what I'm saying, you got a bigger CC, you got the same amount of air and fuel going into it, so now you might, you know, be a little lean. Then you might want to go to the 110. I'm just saying, you know, or the other option is stay with the 100 and go with the big valve heads. You're going to do the same type of thing. You're going to get more air and fuel in there, and more air and fuel is going to reach the maximum mixture, and it's going to work better. So big valve heads can help too and change the whole ratio of everything. You might need a smaller cam with the big valves. It depends on where you want your RPMs to be. If you want your engine to be a serious screamer and a bug, and you can put the big valve heads in and put a big cam in it, and everything will be at the top end. You won't have any bottom end, but you can't do that in like a larger vehicle. It's going to be really hard. You're going to have to burn up clutches like crazy trying to get it to move. So you can get performance to be all at the top by doing that sort of thing, or if you want it to be all the way through the middle, then you go with a smaller cam with the big valve heads, you know, that sort of thing. I'm just kind of giving you food for thought of what you're trying to do. So then you get to the whole end of it, and you've got your whole engine built. Now you get to your tuning. Your tuning is going to be things like timing. What does timing do? The more advanced you give it, the more time the fuel is in there to burn, okay, in the combustion chamber to burn. So if you can give it more timing, say you didn't give it enough compression ratio, you find out after you got the whole thing built, you kind of engineer it. It's kind of, this is the fun part about building engines. You kind of figure out, okay, I'm going to go for this. And you didn't give it quite enough compression. Instead of tearing it down, you decide, okay, I'm going to go over here to timing. I'm going to give it more advance and see if that goes. And you never want it to detonate. So you bring it up to the point, you know, give it a couple more degrees, drive it, make sure it doesn't detonate when it's climbing hills. Then you start playing with it. Maybe you back it off a little bit. And if you hit detonation, you back it off. And then you got to look at jetting. You might go, okay, let me richen it up, start richening it up till it starts to load up. Then you back it off till it doesn't. Or you can use your bung and put it in there and get it to the ratio you're looking for. And then you go back to timing again. And you might have, let's say you richened it up more. And then that might have corrected your detonation. Then you go a little more timing and see if it works. And if it detonates, then you bring it back. So those are type of things that you're doing when you're finally done. And, more advance is sometimes better than not enough advance. Just depends on what you're trying to do. But if you over advance it and it's pinging, that's where you got to really watch what you're doing, or your head temp starts to raise up. So if you can put a head temp gauge on and watch yourself when you're climbing hills and see if that temperature starts to go up, try richening it up, see if it doesn't go up as much. Okay, by richening it, maybe back the timing off and check it. So there's an old saying in the Volkswagen book, 28 to 32 degrees timing. Well, that's kind of like mostly stock engines. Okay, when you start playing with all this stuff, you can have timing, up to, I think I've got 37 degrees on one of my engines, total advance. People go, oh, that's way too much timing. This sucker won't run until I bring it up that high. Because I've got such a large cam, I've got so much air and fuel. I got a large cam, I got big valves. A large cam and big valves, and I took away all my torque. I'm bringing it back by adding timing. So let me give you an example what that is. So when I raise my timing up, I'm giving it more chance to burn that air and fuel by giving it more advance, because it's, let's say, before top dead center. Now it's firing a little bit earlier, so it fires here, and then it's got all this time to burn before the exhaust valve open. Okay, so you're giving it more advance. That's what that does, is it gives it more time for it to burn. But you got to be careful doing that, because you don't want it to burn too long. And sometimes that's not the best way. Sometimes the best way is to add compression, because maybe having it burn too long is going to get more heat to the exhaust valve, that sort of thing. I'm just kind of giving you ideas, things to think about. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just it's stuff you're playing with. This is like the fun parts about this. But then I got to go back to carburation, see if I'm too rich, too lean, bring that number back, because I'm dealing with air fuel volume, air fuel mixture, timing, all those things, how they work together. Like I said, I can't, people go, well, Mike, what size main jet should I put in my, I have no idea. There's no way to know without looking at the whole thing. And this stuff, literally, you can spend more time on this portion of things than you did putting the whole engine together. We spent like 2 weeks trying to tune my other engines, trying to get them to where, they're right. Okay. Like my camper, I can go up a hill with that much advance and big valves and the cam that's in it, and I can stand on the floor and that sucker does not get hot. It won't ping, it won't, nothing going uphill. So yeah, it's all torquey. It doesn't have any, it doesn't have as much power as it could. Okay. It could have a lot more power if I added more compression, and I went for, and I lowered the advance maybe a little bit, and I, added more carburation to it and got flow and went for more top end power. I could put that engine in a bug and it would really get up and move. So if I put like 44s or 40s on it and I put it in a bug, it would, and I gave it a lot more air and fuel, or gave it a lot more flow going through there with the cam that's in it, and gave it more top end, it would probably really, move out. But I'm not doing that with that engine. I'm making it, pulling the big machine. Now, with this thing, the 1800 that I got in it, the reason, if I wanted to get more power out of it, and I was doing the same thing, I was pulling the same amount of weight with that 1800, dual port heads and a flowing exhaust, and more carburation, this thing would just move out. It would move out a lot better. It would go a lot better. But I'm not trying to do that. I want it to look original again. So depends on what you're trying to do. You know, you guys that, so if people look and they go, hey, I want to mimic the same engine for mine. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you know, if you, the problem, you know, you run into is budgeting too. You know, let's say you go, hey, look, I want more power. Well, okay, spend the, whatever it is, $800-900. I mean, CB Performance, their heads are $1,000. You had $1,000 for a set of heads. Maybe you can't do that. So you're going, well, all I've got is these single ports. Okay. But later on, if you got the money, you can always change the heads. If you've done everything inside that will work with those heads. Okay. So maybe you just put the copper gaskets in, put 60,000 copper gaskets in there, and you know that next time when you got some more money, you can go down to CB Performance, get some 40 head gaskets and larger combustion chamber heads and put them on there and bolt on and get some more power. You know, budgeting also is a major issue, because if I did this with dual port heads and I went to, you know, Panchitos, it would, you know, that add over $1,000 to the engine build. Maybe you can't do that. So anyway, you're trying to get the most you can for your buck. You're trying to get the most performance you can out of the engine. You know, I don't know what else to tell you. I'm just kind of giving you the food for thought to kind of look into all those things and how they all work together to come out with the result that you're trying to get and get the most you can out of the engine. Not, like I said, this isn't the most this engine will do. This engine right here is capable of probably, I don't know how much more power. If I put dual carbs exhaust system on this, even with the Engel 100, I could get a lot more power of this engine. This thing would go, it would, you know, it could be in a Volkswagen Bug and be pretty fast. You know, you don't need to have a 2332 to go fast, guys. A lot of people think you got to have a big engine to go fast. You don't. It's nice. The torque of it's really nice. It's all the power towards the bottom, but you can make an 1800. You can make a 1904. You can make a 1968. Really, really fun by doing all the things you need, which is compression, you know, cam, valve size, and all that stuff. And you can make all that stuff work together perfectly. So like if you wanted a Bug, you wanted a lot of power, you go with the big valve heads, 4035s. I don't know if I go to 44s, it's pretty big for that engine. 4035s, maybe a 100 cam, maybe a 110, you know. I don't know if I go any bigger than that with those. And then you put a bunch of compression in there, you start getting it up to where it's like 9-to-1 or something like that. Dual 40s on there, and it's going to rip. I mean, it's going to be fun, super fun. Those are things you can do if you want to get performance, and you can get pretty good reliability of that because you're only 74 stroke. It's not a lot of reciprocating weight. You know, it's a Porsche design. You're taking it right from the 912. I mean, you know, hey, the rod sizes are similar to that. I mean, if Porsche used it, obviously they knew what they were doing. It's a good deal. So anyway, that's just a little bit of food for thought for you guys. Hopefully the video is pretty long, but you know, if you are really trying to figure this stuff out, this might help you. I don't know, it's a little confusing the way I did. I wish I could figure out a better way to do it. My brain just doesn't work that way. Anyway, I'll talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.